Good morning. This morning I've been asked to cover 4 topics related to the deer management program. A brief update on staff recommendations for the 2018-19 deer hunting seasons. I'll go over a schedule for our deer management plan revision in the upcoming year. I'll also provide a brief update on our deer research program, and then finish up talking about the role of antler restrictions and chronic wasting disease management. Staff are not recommending any changes from the 2017 deer hunting seasons for this year's upcoming seasons. And as is the standard schedule, antlerless license allocations will be available once we have all the harvest and forage data available for this year. A major project for the deer program this year will be to revise our deer management plan. The current plan runs through fiscal year 2018. Our revision will begin with public input in the form of a deer hunter survey that we began last fall. Data entry is nearing an end here. This spring we'll have those data available. We're also looking at holding a stakeholder meeting, bringing different groups in from across the state to gather input regarding the deer program for those folks. Our revision will begin once we have that public input, and we'll work through the summertime on that. This fall, then, we will be conducting internal Game Commission reviews, looking for public comment and review in the spring of 2019, and then having the plan finalized in time for fiscal year 19. Deer research is ongoing, ending, and starting. Earlier this month, we started 4 deer trapping crews throughout Pennsylvania working on a number of different projects. And if all goes well, this deer capture and release scene will be repeated hundreds of times this winter. The Deer Forest Study continues on State Forest. This study is a collaborative effort with DCNR's Bureau of Forestry, Pennsylvania Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit, and Penn State University. The objectives of this study are to evaluate deer impact measures that we use when making antlerless license allocation recommendations, to evaluate the effectiveness of DMAP, particularly on state forest lands, and that includes deer hunter activities and opinions on those lands, and to improve our understanding of the interactions of deer, soil, and vegetation. And I also want to take a moment to highlight an important communications tool that was created as part of this project, and that is the Deer Forest blog. Since we began the blog 3 years ago, more than 300 articles have been published, and over the course of a year, about 400,000 page views occur. As a result of this following, the blog has provided national exposure for the Game Commission's deer program. Because of the people following the blog, we've been contacted for stories from Smithsonian and Popular Science, and our posts have been shared on national hunting forums and websites, as well as podcasts and Twitter feeds. The fawn survival study will be ending in a few weeks. This study was added to our deer forest study on the Susquehannock, Bald Eagle, and Rothrock State Forest back in 2015. During the 3 field seasons, we captured 165 fawns. In December, one of the graduate students working on this project defended her thesis. She has 1 publication in review at the moment, and will continue to work on another when the data come in from the 2017 fawns. And then the next month, all of our 2017 fawns will make it through the 34 weeks since capture, at which point the study will end and we'll move on to data analysis at that point. Deer and elk and wildlife health personnel, in collaboration with the South Central Region and Pennsylvania Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit, are beginning a new study in DMA2. And DMAs 2 and 3 are represented by the light-colored areas on this map. The study area itself is within DMAP Unit 2874 in southern Blair and northern Bedford counties. This study area is split by Units 2C and 4A. And the study will investigate the question, can we control CWD? Deer will be captured and marked with ear tags and GPS collars to monitor survival, harvest rates, and movements, including dispersal of the young deer. The new field crews are in place, and so far they're reporting good cooperation with landowners who are providing sites for them to set up nets to capture deer, and we expect to start trapping deer on this study area later this week. When discussing agency responses to CWD, some suggest elimination of antler restrictions will help combat CWD. Based on data from Pennsylvania and experiences from other states, we have not yet recommended the removal of antler point restrictions in CWD DMAs. First, we can look at Pennsylvania data. We know that removal of antler restrictions will not slow the spread of CWD due to buck dispersal. We also know that hunters like antler restrictions, and effective CWD management will require hunter participation. Second, we can look at other states' experiences. Studies of CWD using data and computer models suggest Pennsylvania's antlered harvest should be adequate for CWD management. And in the next few slides, I'll go through each of these points individually. In terms of CWD spread, antlered bucks disperse before hunters can stop them. As a result, changing antler point restrictions will not necessarily impact significantly the number of bucks dispersing. Based on research conducted in Pennsylvania, 50 to 70% of yearling bucks will disperse from where they were born. This line shows the cumulative dispersal frequency from January, when the bucks are about 6 months old, to 18 months of age in December. The bucks will start growing their first set of antlers in the spring, and dispersal will occur soon after. From April to July, we're looking at about 30% of dispersal taking place. Then after their first set of antlers harden in late summer, the remainder of the yearling buck dispersal will occur. On average, these bucks are moving about 5 miles from where they were born. The orange line represents the cumulative harvest of antlered deer throughout the archery and firearms seasons. Archery harvest starts slow, pick up in late October, early November, and then with the firearms season, we see the proportion of the bucks being harvested increases significantly. In terms of timing, dispersal is essentially completed when most of our antlered bucks are being harvested. And if reducing dispersal is the goal, the bucks need to be removed before they grow that first set of antlers, and that can only occur with an antlerless harvest. And I don't put it on this slide, but we also know that about 12% of our yearling does will disperse. On average, they're going to disperse twice as far as the bucks. We also know that about half of those yearling does will move outside of their home range at some time during the fawning season, which on this map would correspond with May-June time period. Those trips are about the same distance as an average buck dispersal. They'll go out about 4 miles, and then after a couple of days, they will come back. But we see about half of our yearling does also moving miles outside their home ranges. From our work on dispersal of does, we have also seen a trend where the lower the density, the lower you can expect female dispersal to be. Bucks, on the other hand, their dispersal does not appear to be related at all to density. So young deer do disperse and can spread CWD, and to reduce that dispersal, the deer must be removed prior to that dispersal time period as part of an antlerless harvest. Changing the antlered harvest at this point, once they have antlers, would have little effect on dispersal. Socially, our hunters are satisfied with APRs. In our 2014 Deer Hunter Survey, hunters supported antler restrictions by a 3-to-1 margin. Given this level of satisfaction with antler point restrictions, we as managers should have a good justification if we're going to make a change to antler point restrictions. For example, if we have good evidence that removing antler point restrictions will have a noticeable and positive effect on CWD management, then we would recommend such a change. At this point, though, without the good evidence, we have not made that recommendation. We'll finish up looking at some of the information from other states. Based on the available information, removal of antler point restrictions likely will not have a significant effect on CWD. First, studies from other states suggest Pennsylvania's antler point restrictions can be effective for CWD management. This conclusion is based on harvest rates and the timing of the bulk of antlered harvest. A recently published set of recommendations to address CWD from Western state agencies indicates that antlered harvest should be greater than 30% and occur after the rut. In Pennsylvania, our antlered harvest rates are greater than 30%, and the bulk of our deer are harvested during the firearm season, which is after the rut. In another paper, our antlered harvest rates are close to a male-focused harvest strategy, and the male-focused harvest strategy provided the best CWD control over the course of a 50-year period. So based on these data and models from other states, it appears Pennsylvania's antlered harvest rates are adequate for CWD management. Second, even with antler restrictions, most of the deer left in the population post-hunt or after the hunting season are not antlered deer. Yearling adult males make up about 20% of the population after the hunting season. Adult females make up over half the population. Juveniles, the deer that will disperse before the next hunting season, make up about a quarter. As a result, if we removed every antler deer each year, we would still have more than 75% of the population capable of perpetuating and spreading CWD to new areas. This is likely one reason we see increased antlered harvest and targeted removals appearing to be the most effective method of managing CWD in other states. And given that APRs will not stop buck dispersal and our antlered harvest rates appear to be adequate, we are not making a recommendation to remove antler point restrictions in our DMAs. However, given the serious nature of CWD, we will continue our evaluations of antler point restrictions as new information becomes available. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Really good information. Any questions or comments from the commissioners?
Adult males,
Yes.
bucks. What are we seeing as far as prevalence of CWD in the research or the data we're getting back?
In terms of prevalence, I'm not sure exactly where the numbers are. Our prevalence rates are generally low. One of the things, and we've had this debate, Justin and I were actually debating it yesterday via email, in terms of prevalence and how to interpret that information. And one of the issues that came out in a recent paper on white-tailed deer was the harvest susceptibility of adult bucks with CWD. And in that particular study, bucks that had CWD were much more vulnerable to harvest. So if you're just going off your hunter harvest, you can't assume that that sample from the hunter harvest is necessarily representative of what's out there in the population, right, because deer with CWD are being harvested at a higher rate potentially than deer without it. And the thought is there's something there with their behavior in terms of how alert they are, that type of thing. Basically, that's theory, hypotheses at this point. But prevalence rates with adult bucks, it gets a little touchy in terms of, okay, what is that telling us about the population? In terms of looking or monitoring for CWD, in that case, that data can be helpful. It may be even more efficient. If those bucks are more vulnerable to harvest and you're using hunter harvested samples, looking at adult bucks may give you an earlier detection of CWD. Doesn't necessarily translate directly back to the population itself. And we also collect a lot of roadkills, which a lot of states don't do. And in that case, we see a lot of positives, proportion of positives are coming from yearling males and adult females. So it's a mixed bag, and like so many things with CWD, there are no black and white answers.
I was going to say, it's frustrating, isn't it? There's no absolute answers when it comes to CWD.
If you like black and white and warm and fuzzy topics, let's move on to something else. Right. Yeah. Any other questions?
I'm seeing some stuff, Chris, on some research that shows there's like essentially subspecies within the deer population of Pennsylvania. Maybe they're inhibited by movement over mountains or whatever. And does that have any implications with CWD? Do we find it any more or less susceptible?
In our view of it right now, based on what we know, that could have potential in terms of maybe focusing our sampling efforts. For example, bucks. When we've seen buck dispersal in the past, it has tended to follow ridges and valleys. So in this area, in DMA2, where we have that ridge and valley component, our sampling efforts may be more efficient if we're sampling north of those valleys, up through the valleys. The problem is when we look at our doe dispersal, they just wander. They don't seem to be as influenced. So the idea of subpopulations, if there was a strong genetic component where certain animals they're not technically, at least as far as I know, none of them are resistant to it. They just can carry it longer before it kills them. It might have something, but I don't know that the differences between one subpopulation and another from that standpoint would be that dramatic that it would be worth us trying to alter our management according to it. I think that from the buck dispersal side, there's some information there that would be helpful. There's also some information there that's less than encouraging when you look to the south into Maryland and West Virginia. That ridge and valley runs right up to where we are now. So we can probably expect that to be a continual movement of deer from the south up through that ridge and valley in southern Pennsylvania.
Thank you. At this point, we're going to take a 10-minute break.
Thank God for 10-minute break.
You see that one yet? Still kind of bashing on us.
Well, but this is a reprint of his fall. I got
Yeah, I did too.
email.
After we met
And
with
then, yeah, exactly. And then I looked. This was his fall.
oh, so they
Where he went right off the reservation. And this was just a replot.
Thanks, Chris.
Hello, sir.
How are you?
All right.
Behaving down here? Okay.
Make sure this thing's working for you.
Stay apart. Mr. Doom and Gloom, how are you?
I like some of that stuff together.
Assume that's
That I don't know, because they switched laptops.
Oh, really?
It worked for me.
Okay.
He's enough.
Oh,
I heard you.
okay, good. Well, folks sitting up there were most important anyhow, so if they heard me, we're good.
Sorry.